good, y'all? Black It Indeed. We are back. Still season 5, episode 4 now, and we have a great episode planned for y'all today. This episode that we've been wanting to work on for a while now. We finally have the means to do it. As always, my name is Isaiah.
My name is Luzolo.
This is Black It Indeed. So we'll get into our first topic of today, which is actually a comment that we got from YouTube. Thank you to the person who made this comment. We're very grateful for it because it was a really good comment that we could speak a little bit more on about as well. So this comment focused on how do we as African Americans think that Asian people, Middle Eastern people, and Hispanic people perceive us? This question ties back to our second episode about black perception. So I'll answer this first part. The perception is really interesting to me. I think starting off with Hispanic people, I think that if there's any other race or ethnicity that we have commonalities with, I think it'd be Hispanic people in a sense.
That's
because
facts.
we both
That is
endure
very
a lot
true.
of the same sort of instances. So I think that in regards to Hispanic people, I think they kind of perceive us the same way that we perceive them. It's like we're united, we're solid. I remember back when 2020, when the George Floyd protests, there was black gangs and Hispanic gangs coming together, and they were actually tying their flags together in a sign of unity. So I think that with that, it's like we pretty much have a similar sort of way that we perceive each other. But I will say, though, it was really interesting is that we talked about the use of the N-word in the first episode.
I see where this is going.
Outside of black people, I will say Hispanic people use the N-word a lot more than we do.
Really?
Yes, they use it so much more than we do. So with that, that's pretty interesting to me. But in regard to perception, I don't necessarily think that it's really too bad there. But if we transition over to the Asian perception is really interesting to me. I think that when I think of like where I grew up, for example, back home in Houston, my mom, she would often go to the beauty supply stores. She would often, sorry, Mom, I don't mean to put you on blast and nothing like that, but, she get her weaves and stuff like that, wigs and whatnot, to pretty much up her beauty. And so one thing that was really interesting is that...
Enhance, not up her beauty. Enhance.
My apologies. My apologies, Mom. Hey, thank you, Luzolo, for that one. Enhance her beauty. And so one thing that's really interesting is that in a lot of these beauty supply stores that mainly have black products, hair care products, skin products, a lot of the times they're actually owned by Asian women. Something that's really interesting. Obviously you have African women that also run some stores as well, but a lot of the times it's Asian women. And in those beauty supply stores, one thing that I've noticed going with my mom to those beauty supply stores is that the Asian owners will oftentimes like follow us around, or they'll constantly be like hawk-eyeing us, making sure that we're not, stealing something, putting into our purse, making sure that we're not trying to shoplift, making sure that we're not trying to pull any moves on her potentially. And I thought that was really interesting because whenever you go to an African beauty supply store, it's kind of like there's like a sense of family there. There's a sense of appreciation and generosity from one another. Whereas you're not being followed, you're not being looked around there because there's a sense of trust. It's like there's a form of trust. And I think that that's interesting to really focus on because whenever you go back to these Asian beauty supply stores, it's really different. And I think that a lot of it goes into the representation of black people, which we'll get into later. And tying it into Middle Eastern people, I'd say it's relatively the same sort of thing. If they own, stores or things like that, they often look at us or perceive us as we may be stealing. They'll perceive us as thieves. And that's not all Middle East people or all Asian people. But in my own experience, that's oftentimes what I've come to. But at the same time, I've also been perceived by Middle Eastern people, for example, in a very positive light, and Asian people in a very positive light. Back home, my mom, she would always like to tell them, my accomplishments, my achievements, the things that I was doing. And with that, they were always like very excited. They were always very happy for me. They always were very excited if like another black family came in and they were shopping around. They'd always ask me like, what can I help you with, stuff like that. We weren't perceived as like, we were just perceived as people, as humans. And that's what I thought was very important. So I think that the perception changes based on, who is there, based on the upbringing and also based on representation, which we'll get into later. But in the second part of that question that was on YouTube, the individual also asked, how do we believe that Africans view African Americans and how do African Americans view Africans? So I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Yes. So I definitely know a lot about this topic, and I can go into this for forever. But I grew up in an African household. My parents are migrants from Africa. They're born and raised, very proud of wherever they come from. And I don't mean to put my family on blast either, but I believe that there is great conflict between the African American and the African community. And I say that because I believe that both have believed the stereotypes that white supremacy has said about the other. So like the perception of black people often is negative, is that, or the perception of African Americans, I'll try to be more specific, or black Americans, is that they are lazy, that they are not hard workers, that they're not really intelligent, that kind of thing. So that's the perception of African Americans and black Americans. So if you have Africans who may not know many black Americans or anything like that, they're going to adopt that perception because that is what society tells us, that is what society tells everyone. And then when you look at the perception of Africans, the perception is that, oh, they're savages, oh, they're not really, also not really intelligent, oh, they're like animalistic, you know what I mean? So because that's what society has built a perception of African people, that is what most people believe about African people, especially if they've never met someone before. So the reason why I feel like there's that great conflict is because they both ended up believing the perceptions that white people have told them to believe and what society has told them to believe. And even though that's a very negative thing, I don't think that they can really be blamed for having that perception. However, I do believe that because we know that all of these things are perceptions and they're not true, everyone has the responsibility of like knowing this is a bias that society has given me. So I have the responsibility to like combat that bias and like do specific things in order to disprove it in myself. So that way I don't have that bias anymore, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the experience that I have with, like, and of course it's not everyone. Like this is not like a umbrella, like everyone is like this. There's also, I know a lot of African Americans who are just like, oh yeah, the motherland. Oh, I want to go back to Africa. Like I want to be like around African people. I want to embrace the culture.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So it's like you have good things like that that's going on, or you also have Africans that are like, wanting to befriend like black people, and they have nothing against like black Americans either. But I do think that like it's a commonality that we can see like within those two communities. So, which is very unfortunate, and I'd love to see more like room for like connecting because we're all black. We all have we all have similar. I'm not gonna say the same experiences because like black Americans don't have the experience of being like foreigners, and African Americans don't have the experience of like the systemic like trauma that black Americans have had to gone through in the US. But I think it'd be very cool if we had like some nice like how you say like a nice community going out together. And I feel like on campus, like on Notre Dame's campus, that does not include us because I feel like ASA and like BSA, like African students and black students here really do intermingle, which is great. So I really think it's like the generations that are older than us, not necessarily our generation. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think adding on to that as well. One thing that was really interesting to me, so growing up in my high school, I had a very diverse high school. And in that high school, we had a sizable amount of African students in there.
Oh, nice.
And so there was times where African students would want to express their own culture. And one of the main ways that they would do that is through food. And so there was, there's certain African cultures in which whenever they eat their food, they may eat with their hands rather than with utensils, forks, spoons, knives, and whatever. And I remember there was a time where some African students, they brought their food to the cafeteria, and they were eating their food, and there were some African American students who made the comment of, who eats like that? And they're like, why are you eating with your hands? That's so disgusting that you're eating like that. And it was all because of it was like what you're talking about, perceiving Africans the same way that white people have established that dominant narrative that they're savages, that they're X, Y, and Z, that they're disgusting people, which is completely false. And so that was really interesting to me because with me, it's like, I love African cultures. Like there's so many cultures, and I was sitting there with them, eating the food with my hands too, like enjoying the meal with them. And really, they were telling me about their cultures, and it was interesting to me. But you had the other African American students who were very like against that. They were perceiving these Africans in a very negative light, and that's what was interesting to me. And to add on to the fact that you talked about our community here, the African American and African community here, I would agree too. I think some of the first friends that I met last year, my freshman year, were actually African students. Shout out Obed and shout out to Ernest.
Oh, Obed. I don't know who Ernest is, but I know Obed. Yeah. Obed's awesome.
Shout out to them. They were some of the first friends that I made here on campus, and they were African students. And I mean, they're cool people. I remember Obed was telling me like, hey, you want to come back, with us one day? You let us know. Like, we'll take you back. I was like, I'll do it. Like it was cool to me. So I think that the perception, like you said, a lot of it stems down to what the dominant white society has portrayed us as. But I think that it's also important to recognize, kind of like what you were saying earlier, before we started filming was the white society has placed that dominant narrative on us, that we're that we're negative, that we're savages, that we're thugs, that we're animals. And that's what they've placed on us, that's what they've ingrained in us. But it's also up to us to break away from that narrative.
Exactly.
It's up to us,
for our own healing.
Especially for our own healing. And also whenever I was speaking about, Asians and Middle Eastern people, some of them hold perceptions that are based on false preconceived notions of what black people actually are because of what white people have established before. And it's also up to them as well to break away from those. It's also up to them to ensure that they can move away, from those, so that way that whenever black people go into their stores, black people can feel comfortable, they can feel like they belong in those stores, and they don't feel like outliers, they don't feel like outcasts, essentially.
100%. Yeah. I would love to add to that too, and this might be a more extreme statement, but I really full-heartedly believe this, is while other races and ethnicities can have bias and discriminate against black people can also do this against their own people. So I would be lying if I told you I had no bias or discrimination against black people. But it's not I do it because I don't like black people. It's because it's ingrained in me. That's not my fault. That society decided to say all these things to me and show all these things to me. That's not my fault that I was taught that. But I am, knowing that these things are false and knowing that they're not true, I'm being proactive and making sure that I dismantle all of those discriminations that I may hold or I may have, and I try to not let it affect my life too much, if that makes sense.
And that's the perfect segue into our actual topic for today, which is the power of positive black representation.
Yes, yes, yes.
Positive black representation is the way in which we can actually begin to dismantle those sort of systems. And so that's what we want to talk about today for our Black and Indie audience. So about last week to about 2 weeks ago, in one of my Africana Studies classes, we were actually speaking about the power of positive black representation. And in this argument that we were generating, we talked about why representation alone is not enough. It must be positive. We can look towards movies that we call hood classics, for example, Friday, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, movies that we as black people love. But at the same time, they also portray black people in a very negative light. They portray black people as, potheads with Friday, right? It's almost the whole premise of the movie is just being high the whole time and then, trying to escape Debo. You have Boys in the Hood where there's a bunch of gangs, a bunch of violence, especially what they call black on black crime. We'll get into that another time.
I hate that, by the way.
I hate it too.
But keep going.
Yeah, we'll get into that another time. And then there's also the, Menace to Society where, once again, it's a lot of black on black crime. It's also just a lot of, in the beginning of the movie where Q-Dog, I believe is his name, he went and robbed an Asian convenience store and, committed crimes there. So a lot of the times there's this notion that black people are going to be perceived in a negative light as violent, animals, savages, thugs, like we've spoken about before. So why is this important? That's the real point, is why is this important? The answer is that children are growing up watching these things. Black children specifically are growing up watching these movies. I remember I was young whenever I watched these movies. And while I had the wherewithal to understand that this is not what black people are confined to, I understood that is a reality for a lot of black people. But I think that there becomes this understanding that for non-black people, they are unable to make that distinction that that's not what black people are confined to. A lot of people, they genuinely believe that black people are confined to violence, to crimes and whatnot. And so when children, black children specifically, are growing up and this is what they're seeing, and the white society who's going to be dictating most of the time where their lives may go in the future, education, with jobs, if that's also what they're seeing, it's not going to blend well. It's not going to blend well whatsoever. And so one thing that we spoke about a lot was a Walter D. Myers article. Walter D. Myers is a very famed author. He wrote one of my favorite books, Monster. Y'all should check that book out if you ever get the chance to. And in this New York Times article, he spoke about how one thing that he really knew that he needed to do for inner city black children was make them feel human. Just think about that, for example. You believe that your goal in life, that your obligation in life is to make a black child feel human. A lot of that comes down to the negative representation that comes with the black body, that comes with blackness. And so while he was speaking in this, or while he was writing this article, he focused on the fact of positive black representation. He brought up an example of whenever he was on the hiring committee at a transformer firm. And at this firm, there was two candidates with similarly stunning resumes. One was black from Grambling,
Oh,
and
this
one
story.
was white. One was white, right? And he knew that the black man was qualified. He knew that the black man could do the job. And he said to his white supervisor, I think we should hire the black man. Immediately, his white supervisor laughed at him. And he was like, no.
Not the laughing.
He said, we're not doing that. And watch the image, she said, well, why? He was very adamant. Why do you say this? And his white supervisor said, because there's no way that a black man can be a chemist. I've never heard of a black chemist before. And Walter D. Myers, he spoke more on why this white man would have this understanding, would have this notion. And what he came down to was the fact that when you look at media and when you look at literature, as a lot of educated people, they like to read more literature, where are you seeing the representation of black chemists? Where are you seeing the representation of black neurosurgeons, of black professors, black teachers, black lawyers, black attorneys? Where do you see that? And he came to the conclusion that there's not enough of it. And because of that, when you have people in power who are making these decisions, they oftentimes don't even have a clue that black people can be anything outside of what you see in Friday, outside of what you see in Menace Society and Boys in the Hood. You know, so is there something that you would like to add on to that as well? Or?
Yeah, 100%. I think positive representation is very important. Something that it makes me think about how is like, we talked about like positive representation like in the media, for example. So like when you're watching like movies or TV shows, there's a lot of them, especially historically, like the popular ones typically are like all white casts. They don't really have like any diversity at all, not diversity in like ethnicity or race or like religion. Like literally it's almost like they're just fully white shows. So I think there's really good importance in making sure that you have those diversity in shows, because when all you see is like movies that kind of like talk about like hood life or like talk about like gangs and that kind of life, and you don't have like just regular like TV shows that just happen to have a black person but don't really go into their like identity, kind of like documentaries and different things like that, it shows that like, okay, this is all black people are and this is all that we associate black people with. Like we can't see them just like as an individual, like we have to see them associated with like their trauma or with like the negative, like with black people like in the worst situation, so like in like poor neighborhoods or in like neighborhoods that do have like violence or gang violence or like different things like that. So I think that's why it's very important to have positive representation. And then you also hinted at this too, but it's important for like black kids as well and for black people in general, because like you're mentioning like with the black chemist, I'm sure like if you went back like pretty far enough, there would be like maybe a few, but like it'd be like very small. So sometimes black people do have to be the first one, but if you see like the first one in another field, maybe you're thinking, oh, they were able to be the first one, I could be the first one. Or if you want to be a chemist and you see like maybe even one other black chemist, you're like, they could do it, so why can't I? So that's why positive representation is very important, because often black people are portrayed and shown in a negative light, and every community needs positivity and uplifting, because like when you have a community like the black community that's always had a negative connotation for a majority of its existence, it can become very hard to kind of be uplifting and be positive and to want to keep moving forward, because there's like no positivity there, and that's the only way that progress can happen, is if you have like that positivity in place, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
And that hope, hope that you could be
absolutely
better.
The hope is very important, and we also need to recognize and realize that we as black people, especially this is for the black children who may be watching this episode, we need to make sure that y'all understand that you can become more than just rappers and entertainers and athletes.
Yes.
Because that is a very big thing that a lot of black people feel that they're confined to.
Because that's where you see all the black people.
Exactly. You know, the NFL was almost exclusively black. NBA, same sort of thing. And these are the professional sports that a lot of kids, they dream. You know, they see Michael Jordan, they see LeBron James, they see Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. They see all these players, and they're like, I want to be like that. And they sometimes, you know, I mean, there are a lot of instances where the only way that they can become something, the only way they can get out the hood, they can get out of the inner city, is if they actually follow the athletic route. But there's also times where some black children feel as though they can't even pursue the academic route because they want to become this multi-millionaire athlete, they want to become this multi-millionaire rapper, this multi-platinum rapper. You know, I'm wearing a DMX shirt right now, may he rest in peace. I love DMX, one of my favorite rappers. And he spoke a lot about this as well in his rhymes. You know, he always wanted to make sure that children, especially black children, felt the need that they didn't have to be like him. They didn't have to be like DMX. They didn't have to be like Jay-Z. They didn't have to be like Tupac. They could be their own individuals. They could be academics. And that's what I think is very important to recognize as well, is that we're not confined to these sort of constraints that we believe that we sometimes are. We can also be, you know, black chemists. We can be black lawyers. We can be black doctors. And it's important to recognize that, and that's why I'm so happy that we have, if any of y'all have seen the show Abbott Elementary with Kenta Brunson, it's so important, the show that she's doing right now. It's such an important show because it's showing black children, like if y'all have never seen the show before, imagine it's like The Office, but just black. It's a black version of The Office, and it takes place in an actual school. And a lot of the children in the classrooms, they resemble a lot of black children, you know, as, in their day-to-day lives as being students, black students. The teachers, they resemble black teachers as well. And they're not seen as ignorant. The children aren't seen as ignorant. They're not seen as lazy, the sort of stereotypes that are placed on us. The teachers aren't seen as ignorant or uneducated, or maybe they were a diversity hire. They're not seen as that. They're seen as black people that care for their black children, and the black children are seen as children who care for their teachers. And that's such a positive representation because it shows black children like you can be something. You know, it's like, and I appreciate what Quinta Brunson is doing because it's so powerful and it's so important because there aren't many black shows like that are out right now where you have that sort of positive representation. You know, you go to the family dynamic, for example. One of my favorite shows is My Wife and Kids. I love that show. It's a powerful black show. And it shows the struggles, but also the triumphs of the black family. And that's so important to realize because there's not many shows that are out like that. You know, we can't really point to too many shows where you actually see a strong, healthy black family, for example, not the stereotypical representation of the single mother and you know,
or the
like
abusive father
kids.
or whatever.
Exactly, or, you know, like Bebe's kids, you know, whatever. Like we don't see many sort of representations outside of those. And so it's so important that we have black representation to show kids that they can become more than athletes, rappers, entertainers, and that we can show what a real black family can actually look like with a strong father, a strong mother, and strong black children.
100%,
It's so important.
Another show that I would love to drop too is Blackish. I love the show Blackish. And I feel like it does a really good job of explaining different, I don't even know how to, like, just explaining the black experience. It does a really good job at that, and it also does a really good job of giving representation, like a black woman who is an established doctor who always, and like, even though they try to make it like a little excessive with how much Rainbow is like, oh yeah, I'm a doctor. Like, I love that they do that because it shows that Rainbow's confident in herself and in her own accomplishments. So that's like great. That's like black woman empowerment, which is what I love. So that's a really great show. And the one episode I'm remembering now is like the little, oh, I forgot her name, but Marseille Martin. I forgot what her name was on the show, but she had like this whole thing where she was kind of like exploring her hair and how she wanted her hair to be, because typically she relaxed it, and then later throughout the end of the episode she decided that she wanted to keep it natural. And I feel like that's such an important, like, hair is so important in the black community, especially like with black women. And I've gone through a similar story of like having, like, relaxing my hair for most of my life and then deciding like, okay, I'm gonna keep my hair natural. And like for some people they might not understand like, okay, why is this so important? Like, I don't, but they do a really good job of like explaining it, showing like the thought process that a woman could go through or a girl could go through in order to think about that. So I really love that show about that. It's just such a good show. I highly recommend that show if you haven't watched it also. And then something else too that I think is important to note is like when you talk about like the athletes and like the musicians and the entertainers, like when you think about black people are often like seen as only being able to fill those roles, right? So when you look at those fields, you often see black people because black people are like, they're seen as valuable in those areas. But when you look at like maybe a teacher or a chemist, like we were saying, or a professor, or like, I don't even know, like, but really any career, or like a doctor. When you think about that, like, you don't really see many of them because they're not seen as valuable in those fields. And like, why is that? Like, because they're like, they have gone through the education, they have gone through as much experience as work as anybody else in those fields, but they're not highlighted as much as opposed to like when they're an entertainer or like an athlete in sports. So I think it's also very important for the media to also start showing that representation and start showing like real people in their everyday lives, because they've done the work to get there as well, and they deserve to be recognized for all the hard work that they do. And that's how you change the perception. That's how you change it. So. Absolutely,
and I think you touched on a very important point as well, is realizing that when it comes to positive black representation, yes, the absolute goal is to make sure that black people, black children, black young adults, black adults can see themselves in a positive light, so that they can realize they can become more than what they believe they may be confined to. What's also important about it is also that non-black people, whenever they see positive black representation, they begin to change their negative preconceived notions of what blackness is, begins to become disfigured and dismantled over time because they're able to see, hey, look, there's a black teacher right here on the Abbott Elementary. Hey, look, here's a black professor over here. Hey, look, here's a black physicist. You know, like they're able to see these sort of things, and they're able to see that black people can become more than something. And with that, over time, it could begin to break down those barriers of communication between non-black people and black people. It can begin to break down those barriers of perceiving black people as, you know, those thugs, those negative stereotypes. And maybe if we go back to the Walter D. Myers article, maybe if that white supervisor had actually seen a lot of positive black representation for black scientists, he would have never had that thought. He would have never thought that a black man couldn't have been a chemist. And that's what I think is important, is that over time, you know, as more and more of us are graduating from college, we're going into the corporate world, we're going to other white-dominated spaces. There's going to be a lot of white people who are going to view you in a negative light. They're going to view you as just that diversity hire to fill in the diversity, equity, and inclusion requirement.
Yeah, because they've never seen anyone like you.
Exactly. They're not going to think that you really have the capacity or the wherewithal to actually become something in life. And so that's why I think that black positive representation is so, so important.
It gives mentors, it gives people to look up to. It's a really good thing to have.
Absolutely. And I think that this is another crucial segue to get into our second topic, which is pretty much, can blackness be questioned / a continuation of why black positive representation is important? For those of y'all that have been following social media, y'all been following Twitter, Instagram, for y'all old people, Facebook, I'm sure y'all might have seen Kanye West's recent stunt. I believe it was in a Paris fashion show that he was hosting. He wore a very controversial piece of clothing.
I'm not even gonna hide my detest. Like, you guys saw my facial expressions, you know how I feel.
For those of y'all that didn't see it, he wore a shirt that said "White Lives Matter," and he also posed for a picture with famed black conservative Candace Owens, as well as what I think was hurtful to a lot of the black community as well was Lauryn Hill. Her daughter also wore the shirt and posted that on her Instagram.
Wait, I did not see that. Oh no.
So there was a lot of issues with that whole thing.
Yeah.
But what we wanted to focus on that was essentially why that is important when we talk about representation. We need to realize is that Kanye West has his net worth of what, over $1 billion. He has a huge platform with many, many millions of followers on Instagram, Twitter. He has a bunch of followers on these platforms, which means he has a lot of influence. And if you watch some of his interviews in the past, he's always talked about how he wanted to have a lot of respect so he could have a lot of influence. And whenever he's using his power and his influence to spread these messages like White Lives Matter, and for those of y'all that didn't follow, he, after receiving a lot of backlash and a lot of controversy, he posted on his Instagram story, I believe his Instagram story, that Black Lives Matter was a scam, and that...
I could not believe it. You couldn't imagine my shock. I was like, ain't no way this man really just said that.
He said that Black Lives Matter was a scam, which, if you're going to talk about the organization, okay, sure. Like, they funneled millions of dollars into buying mansions. You know, the co-founders, they did that. But we're not talking about the organization. We're talking about the actual message, the actual movement behind it, the Black Lives Matter movement. And so the reason why it was so devastating, I guess not really devastating to me, because I don't really follow Kanye. Like, I'm not a Kanye
I don't either,
fan.
so like, I was never a fan in the first place, to be honest.
Yeezys. I don't own anything like that, his own, you know, sneakers and stuff. I don't own any of that.
Me neither.
But I think what kind of hurt me in a sense was the fact that he's using his platform not to uplift the black community, but to degrade the black community, and instead use a counter-protest, White Lives Matter, to then override the protest that he should be supporting himself, which is Black Lives Matter. That's what was very hard to me. And what even hurt my soul even more was the fact he posed with Candace Owens. I mean, goodness gracious. We all know, if y'all don't know Candace Owens, she's a black conservative who has said many things in the past about how racism doesn't exist, oppression doesn't exist.
Tries to appease white people.
All the time. She's been a very big proponent of getting rid of critical race theory in public schools, which is not even in public schools, but she's, you know, she talked about how
I hate that. Oh, you just brought up so many things that made my blood boil.
She talked about how she doesn't want, you know, white kids being, you know, crying and stuff like that, being taught that they're racist, which isn't even what critical race theory even is.
Oh my God.
You know, and she completely ignores the black children who are self-harming in as young as elementary school because they're being told that they're not good enough as black people.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's what I think Kanye West doing the White Lives Matter, and then posing with Candace Owens.
Yeah, not even all lives matter. It was White Lives Matter. Let's talk. Yeah. Like, think about that. Okay.
Go ahead, share your piece.
No, 100%. It's like When we talk about kind of like our segue was like, is there, what was the segue question again? It was like the second question that we had. It was like, is there like a right way to be Black, or is like, there's like, was that what, it was along those lines, right? It was along those lines. So like, obviously Black people are not a monolith. Black people have all different beliefs. We are on like all sides of the spectrum, and I'm okay with that. I can understand that we all are different. However, when you do something that like negatively impacts another community or another movement that's like actively trying to like better itself and actively trying to like get justice for like how they've been systemically treated in the US, that is a no-no. Like, if you have disagreements, or like if you have disagreements about Black Lives Matter, okay, let's have a productive conversation about it. But let's not go out and say like White Lives Matter, because you know that's going to anger people. If you really do care about like uplifting Black people, then you wouldn't do something that would directly anger them. Which doesn't make any sense to me. You would want to have a productive conversation about it, and I feel like Kanye never really has a productive conversation about it. He kind of like drops something that's like controversial, and he just lets it be. And I'm like, that's not how these things are working. And when you think about like White Lives Matter, it like,
when have white lives ever been endangered?
Exactly, that's the thing. That's the thing. Saying White Lives Matter like enhances and perpetuates the myth that Black Lives Matter means only Black Lives Matter, which is not what it means. So just saying that shows like, oh, let's draw attention somewhere else. The attention has always been on white people. Black people can have spotlight if they want to, but we're not just wanting to have spotlight for us. We just want to have more representation. We want to have a better positive image. We want to show people that we are better than how we've been perceived. Like, it has not, like, so it's very angering. And I feel like I flustered over my words just because it makes me so mad, but like, I hope you understand what I'm saying. So.
And we're not talking about this to give Kanye West like the light of day to just live in our heads rent free. We're talking about this because this is such an important, conversation to have. Because I don't know about you, I don't know what you're gonna do, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. But if I see a white student walk around this campus with a White Lives Matter shirt on, their little Kanye White Lives Matter shirt, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
That's very true.
Like that.
I've never thought about, for God forbid. Oh my gosh.
He's empowering these sort of messages. Like,
that's
these are
true.
Things
he's empowering bigotry. He's promoting bigotry.
And there was white people in the Instagram and Twitter comment sections of these posts from Complex, from Kanye himself, and they're saying like, oh yeah, I support Kanye. And some of them may be trolling. I'll say that. Some of them may be trolling. Some of them may not actually be serious. But there is definitely a sizable amount of them who are actually dead serious. Like, yeah, this is I like Kanye now. This is the Kanye that I want to, I really want to support. I'm going to buy that shirt as soon as he releases it. And that's so.
Oh, he better not.
Oh, who knows what he's going to do at this point.
He better not.
But it's so frustrating seeing that. One of my favorite shows is The Boondocks. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Oh, Boondocks, yes, I have.
I love The Boondocks. And there's a character in The Boondocks, for those of y'all that's never seen the show, there's a character named Uncle Ruckus. And
Uncle Ruckus.
In The Boondocks, Uncle Ruckus, he's this black character who does not believe he's black. He believes that he's a white man trapped in a black man's body. And he says a lot of racial slurs to black people. He constantly hates on black people. He constantly hates on the Freemans, which is the main character.
Constantly tries to appease white people.
Absolutely. And that's what Kanye West really reminds me of. We go back to the slavery was a choice thing with that whole TMZ thing. We go into his support of Donald Trump and, wearing the MAGA stuff. And I remember after he said that, or after he, supported Donald Trump, I think there was like articles going around from his managers and stuff like that who were saying that he only wore like the MAGA merch and all that stuff to kind of become friends with Trump, only so that he could get like black people out of prison. Kim Kardashian was doing the whole like trying to get black people out of prison and all the exoneration stuff.
Yeah.
But whenever you see this whole White Lives Matter stuff, you saying that he was only trying to become like a MAGA man just to get black people out of prison doesn't even make it just completely folds. And for him to like further double down on that and say BLM is a scam, don't believe that, you're welcome, White Lives Matter. Like for you to say that, it just, I don't understand. It's obviously, he's trying to get, attention.
Yes.
He's trying to draw controversy. At the same time, like we already know, as soon as something else happens with Yeezy, as soon as something else happens with Adidas, and he's, on the back burner again, he's gonna come crying to the black community saying, hey, come help me, support me now. And it's like, why should we? You literally just stated an entire message that went against all of our interests, just so that you could appeal to like a white audience. But I don't even know I don't even know why he even said white lives. Like I don't even know the whole like meaning behind just wearing a White Lives Matter merch. It makes no, like honestly, I'm thinking about it now again. it makes no sense to me.
And there was no purpose. Like, there's nothing happening recently with BLM that like could have like spurred this. He just like out of nowhere decided to drop this.
Exactly.
Like I don't understand.
I don't need that. It's just to agitate people. But it's like, why would you agitate some of the main consumers of your products?
That is also very true.
Exactly.
But then again, when you think about it, it's like something that I've thought about too is like, should we be supporting like people that we don't agree with politically? That's a common thing. Like, should we be like listening to like rappers or like R&B artists that or like different people like that who like have history of like sexual assault or like of different things like that. So like it's an interesting thing to come up with. And when you think about most musicians or most like artists or entertainers, people are like, oh, separate the art from like the artist. You know what I mean? So it's like something to think about. And I feel like when it comes to Kanye, his main demographic doesn't do that. They like separate the art from the artist, I think. So like even though people may like his music, that doesn't necessarily mean that they like support what he says, but they still like his music and they just see it as like a separate thing and they're okay with that.
But I think that's the problem that I have with that is even if you try to separate that, you're still funding this man. Like you're
no,
still
100%.
Exactly.
Like I don't do it. I 100% agree with you.
Funding
Yeah.
this man and like all of his endeavors. You're only elevating his platform so he can continue to say this. Because if he has no money, if he has no social media followers, then anything he says doesn't matter. But if you continue to buy his products, like literally the day after he said that he had the whole White Lives Matter merch on, I saw a black student in one of my classes wearing Yeezy slides. And I'm like, this man just said something that literally just degraded you, and you're still gonna wear his stuff. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating, understanding the fact that he can say these things, and since he has so much power, so much influence, it doesn't matter what he says. There's still gonna be members in the black community who are gonna, whenever he releases his next Yeezy shoes, they're gonna go buy the new Yeezy shoes. If he releases his little homeless clothes with all the little baggy holes in
his homeless clothes.
they're still gonna go and buy them. So like it's so frustrating because it's and we're laughing now, but it's like it's so like internally we're very frustrated.
No, it is very
frustrating. Because it's
frustrating.
such a dangerous
It seems
thing.
counterproductive. It seems like we're just taking steps forward only to take more steps back. So it really doesn't make any sense to me.
And that's such an important thing to make. There's millions of us in the streets after George Floyd was killed that were protesting Black Lives Matter, and all it takes is just one powerful black person to retract that entire thing from
That's
to say
true.
that White Lives Matter.
Because then it shows like, because white people, like at least white people, racist white people, they love to make the argument like, oh, but like this black person said this though, which disagrees with what you said. So now Kanye's gonna be used as a pawn in order for them to get what they want and to showcase like, and further like, degrade and further like delegitimize Black Lives Matter, which is also very frustrating because now people are going to say, oh, but like not all black people are like that. Like even Kanye said that like it was a scam, like we should believe him, like he's an influential person. Like that is what this does.
And then that's in time. I'm going to go back to Candace Owens again. That's exactly why she's such a dangerous individual. It's for that exact reason that racist white people would utilize her rhetoric as a means of saying, for example, I had a conversation about a year ago with a southern old white woman who was super Trump, super pro-MAGA. If you're a Republican, like, okay. But whenever you're like
I don't know if I agree with that, but you can keep talking.
Like whenever you're like super like Trumplican, you're not even Republican, you're just Trumplican.
Exactly,
like
there's a difference too, yeah.
It was so frustrating. I was having a conversation with her, and while we were talking, she was saying like, oh, well, racism doesn't exist. She said, here's what she said. She said, oppression is a phrase that's used as a cop-out to black laziness. That's what she said. I promise you that's what she said. And I'm sitting there like, okay. And then I'm like trying to just comprehend this whole statement. And then she says, I mean, that's what Candace Owens says. That's what Candace Owens said.
It blows my mind how people think like this.
There's a black woman that said that. So, and it's like they use her as like the pinnacle of what blackness is. Like because this black woman said this dangerous black woman said this, all of a sudden that's just what matters. And it's so frustrating that it's mind-boggling because it doesn't make sense. It's how can you use one black person to, like you use their rhetoric to essentially encompass all black people. Like you act as if Candace Owens represents all black people, or that she should represent all black people. Well, that's not even the case. What her rhetoric is doing is very dangerous. Saying things like that is very dangerous because you have other white people, especially I'm from Texas, so you got a lot of dangerous white people. They got guns and stuff. Like they'll go and do whatever they want to do. They got the Ku Klux Klan down there and everything. It's like you're only empowering those sort of things.
Exactly. you're not holding people accountable to like their horrible actions, and it just does not make any sense to me. And like going back to what you're talking about before with like the MAGA hat and everything, and how like, oh, I remember seeing somewhere or hearing from somewhere about like how Kanye was saying, oh, I'm like trying to promote unity, I'm trying to promote like what Make America Great Again stands for, because like I believe it's about making America better, yada yada yada. But like making America great, first of all, again, like that means something good was happening before, and like if you look from like the black perspective, we're in the best time as we ever have been, because like things keep getting better, you know what I mean? So like, what you mean again? What you trying to go back to? That's a different story. Exactly, like you trying to go back to something? Going back is dangerous. Anyway, but like I'm just saying, like wearing the hat doesn't show that you care about that. It shows that you support Trump. That is what the hat represents. It is not supporting making America better. It supports Trump. That's what the hat symbolizes. And when you think about, I just lost my train of thought.
I could take over for you while you recover.
I lost my train of thought.
What's also important to recognize is that, you know, you spoke about like Kanye was like, oh, I want to promote unity. I want to allow black people to realize that they can be free thinkers.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, if Republicans weren't so anti-black in their posts, they may not verbalize that. But if they weren't so anti-black with, you know, wanting to ban books about black history, with wanting to
stop critical race theory,
with wanting to mitigate this black history being taught, if they weren't so anti-black and they were just, you know, like a regular party, not saying the Democrats are, but if they're just a regular party, it's like, okay, you know, as a black person, you could vote Republican because you're not voting against your own black, it's your own black identity. You may be voting, you know, whatever Republican platform that you know, whatever policies they like, you may be voting for that. But whenever you're voting, you know, Republican, whenever you have people like Kanye West wearing this MAGA merch, it's like you're literally expressing something that's not a unity. It's going against your own interests.
Exactly. Like having a shirt that says White Lives Matter with Candace Owen in a shirt that also says White Lives Matter, that does not promote unity. That just directly hurts and directly ostracizes everyone who does stand with Black Lives Matter. That is not unity, that is ostracizing. Like you're literally trying, like doing that pushes those people away, and that's not promoting unity out. That doesn't promote conversation, that doesn't promote trying to make things better for everyone or with the black community. Like it doesn't do that. It just divides people further, which is the opposite of what you said you're trying to do, which does not make any sense.
Exactly. I mean, that's such a powerful point to make. And oh my goodness, I wish we didn't live in a time where people like him, Candace Owens, had a platform. You know, social media is such an empowering thing, but it's also such a dangerous thing.
Yeah, very true.
Because at this point, you can spread...
For good and evil.
Exactly, and you can spread these sort of, you know, hateful and ignorant messages to the masses. And you know, it's not going to be censored, because it's, you know, I guess free speech doesn't necessarily apply to, you know, these private platforms when it does, you know, actual public life. But, you know, they still can just ride behind that, you know, oh, well, I'm free to say whatever I want to say. I can say this, I can say that. And it's so dangerous. And I hope Kanye just snaps out of it. You know, he has his phases where he's pro-black.
But like, who's holding him accountable though? Like when you think about it, is there many people holding him accountable for what he's saying? Exactly. That's why people think that they can still do things like this.
And that's what I was saying. If people would stop buying his shoes and stop funding him, that's how you hold him accountable.
Literally, or if another like established, I wouldn't say the word established, but like if another like artist or entertainer or musician was like, hey yo, like that's not like. Maybe behind closed doors they'd be doing stuff like that and we just don't know, but like if you just leave him to do that, he continues to think that this is okay. Like, and that's why things don't get better when you don't hold people accountable. So
such a dangerous thing. Accountability is such a big thing, and especially whenever you have black individuals who are using their power to spread anti-black messages, not only to black people but also to non-black people. And
accountability doesn't have to be a horrible thing either. Like if you correct him, that doesn't mean like, oh, Kanye, you're like such a horrible person and like we never want to like associate with you ever again. But like everyone has room for growth, everyone has room to get better. So like if you're holding him accountable for like actions that he's done, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It could be a good thing so that in the future Kanye doesn't continue to do things like this, or like even people in similar situations that do bad things as well. So it doesn't, I feel like accountability has such like a negative connotation when it's not negative at all. It's supposed to help things get better. So we have to be more comfortable with holding people accountable.
Exactly. Kanye West, please be a better positive black representation for us. And please do not be Uncle Ruckus, please. I think I've said my piece. My throat's starting to hurt now. I'm getting a little parched now. Do you have anything you want to add? Final comments?
Final comments, just black representation sometimes is hard to find, if I'm going to be honest, but I think everyone has the responsibility to make sure that they do take in diverse perspectives, have diverse friends, watch diverse TV shows and movies, listen to diverse news sources, all those good things, because like we all have a responsibility to be aware of what's happening and to get information from different sources of people. And for Black people and white people and all people out there, like it's important for you to see and know that like Black people are not a monolith. There's a bunch of different representation about us out there, but we're just human. We're people like everybody else. We don't have only this Black trauma with us. We don't only have the possibility of being an entertainer to please people. We're also just human who have our own pursuits and our own passions, and we may not have people that we always can look up to, but it's important that we still like strive to get what we want, even if we may not see that representation. But I feel like often it's there somewhere. We just have to find it, and it's like I hate that we have to find it sometimes because it shouldn't have to be so difficult to do so. But yeah,
absolutely. And that's gonna wrap it up. Before we finish, though, I do gotta give one shout out. Shout out to my barber, DJ Classic, best barber and best DJ in the city. I only say
which city?
South Bend, not in the city, South Bend. I just want to give him a shout out. He always got me looking fresh for y'all. So shout out to DJ Classic. I think that's going to wrap it up for us, man. We love y'all. We hope y'all really enjoyed this episode. We hope that y'all really take in every single thing that we've said. We hope that y'all really listen to everything that we said. And then not even just listen, but also internalize everything that we said. Because everything that was said was very deep, was very thoughtful. And I mean, we hope that we ourselves are positive Black, representation models. We hope that there's Black children who may want to aspire to be like us one day and maybe come to Notre Dame and take over the show after we're gone. So as always, don't ever forget, we love y'all. Black is beautiful, Black is love, and Black is excellence, and we out.